Sally that girl in the kitchen. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sally that girl in the kitchen. In today's episode, I'm going to teach you how to make my shortcut puff pastry potato knish. Why knish? Well, because I recognize it's not a true knish. I'm not making the pastry by hand, and I'm using a puff pastry instead as a shortcut. But it definitely has those flavors that are reminiscent of a knish. It is really, really good. Plus, I like to say knish because it makes my young adult boys cringe pretty much every time I say it. So the more they cringe, the more I like to say it. But all joking aside, this is a delicious, easy recipe, comes together real quick, and is really, really tasty. You can serve it just like you would a regular knish. It's a delicious side. So let's not wait another second, and let's get started. For today's recipe, you will need 2 chopped yellow onions, 5 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil, 24 ounces or 1 store-bought container of mashed potatoes. If dairy is a concern, then of course you can use your own homemade mashed potatoes, but this is a shortcut recipe after all, so I'm going to be using store-bought mashed potatoes. 1 package, which is 2 sheets of store-bought puff pastry, a half a teaspoon of ground black pepper, a half a teaspoon of salt, 1 egg, and some non-stick cooking spray. You will also need a cutting board and a knife and a thinner knife, some measuring spoons, a bowl, a fork, and a pastry brush, a spoon, a medium-sized bowl, a baking sheet, and some parchment paper. And you will also need a pan and either a wooden spoon or a spatula. For this recipe, we are going to be using both the stovetop and the oven. So now that we have all of our ingredients and our tools together, let's get started. So the first thing you're going to want to do is remove your puff pastry from the box, and I like to set them out on my counter on some parchment paper to let them thaw. It usually takes about 40 minutes for them to thaw, but since at some point I'm going to have to turn on my oven to preheat it, I actually like to set a 25-minute timer, and then at that point I turn my oven on to 350 degrees to start the preheating process. That way, about 40 minutes will have passed once my oven is hot and ready, and my puff pastry will be perfectly thawed. Then you are to grab your onions and chop them as shown. As a side note, when my middle son was younger, he did not care for onions. So in order to be able to give this the same delicious flavor without having the pieces and the texture of the onions, I used to run them through a food processor and just blend them really, really fine. And then I would just sweat them in a pan instead of browning them and leaving them in chunks. So that is always an option, of course, if you're dealing with finicky eaters. So the next thing you're going to want to do is add your olive oil to your pan. And then you want to add your onions right on top of that. Make sure you get all that yummy onion. Now, turn your stove on to medium heat, because what we want to do is we want to brown these onions. We are really going to get them nice and brown, and that is going to take a little bit of time. So every few minutes, you are going to stir your onions and just move them around that nice and hot pan so that they can start sweating, and then eventually they will start browning. The browning process should take about 10 minutes or so, depending, of course, on your stovetop. So every few minutes, just give your onions a nice stir so that they can evenly brown, and you can make sure that every single piece gets that yummy golden color. So just continue to do so for about 10 minutes until your onions have gotten really, really beautifully golden and fragrant. Now, once your onions are almost ready, is a good time to take your store-bought mashed potatoes and put them in the microwave and just warm them according to the manufacturer's instructions. That way, once your onions are ready, you can pour them into a bowl. Make sure you get all that yummy onion goodness. And then your mashed potatoes will also be ready, so we can combine them with our onions. Now, before we move on, at this point, it's likely that your timer has gone off, so make sure you turn on your oven to 350 degrees to start the preheating process. Then, once you've done so, it's time to combine those delicious onions with our mashed potato. So just grab the mashed potato and use a spoon to add it in to those delicious brown onions. Once you get all of your mashed potatoes into the bowl, then it is time to start seasoning. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to add your black pepper. This really gives it a Knish flavor. It doesn't make it spicy really, but it just really gives us that Knish flavor. Then you're going to add your salt, and of course keep in mind different mashed potatoes require more or less salt. So keep that in mind. I am adding what I find to be the appropriate amount for the brand of mashed potatoes that I am using and the amount of onions that I'm using, but use your judgment, of course. Also, if you've made your own homemade mashed potatoes, as you know how much salt you've already added. Then give your mixture a nice stir. You want to make sure that you incorporate that salt and pepper real well and that it's well distributed amongst your mixture. And then of course you want to bring in those delicious golden onions and make sure that they are also well distributed amongst the potatoes. So give it all a nice stir until you feel that you've incorporated all of your ingredients well. So now it's time to set this mixture aside and to bring over your puff pastry that at this point should be ready to work with and is nicely thawed. So all you have to do really is open up your sheets of puff pastry. There's really not much to it. And then if of course it comes with some paper lining inside, then remove the lining and then just open up your puff pastry to lie it flat on your parchment paper. Then gently use your fingertips to smoothen out your puff pastry a bit. You don't have to worry too much about the folds because we are actually going to use those to let us know where we need to cut. You see how they have these fold marks? That is where we know we are going to cut. So use your thin knife and following those lines from the folded puff pastry, we will use those as a guide and then we will cut on an angle as shown. So we are going to cut both sides of our pastry and we're going to leave the center section intact. So we are going to cut it on an angle and we're going to use those lines as our guide and then we are going to cut towards ourselves. So using the line as our guide and then using our knife to cut strips in the direction of ourself, towards ourself. And you will notice that both our first and last piece are more of a triangle than a strip, but that is totally fine. That's what we're looking for. Then repeat the process on the opposite side. So remembering to leave the center strip intact, and we're going to cut on an angle the same way we did on the opposite side, and we're going to cut towards us. So use your hand to hold your pastry, and then use your knife and you're going to repeat the same exact thing you did on the opposite side. Just create strips. So now bring over your bowl with that delicious potato and onion mixture and you are going to use about half of your mixture to fill this first short cup puff pastry potato knish, as we will get 2 knishes out of this recipe. So use about half of your mixture and then put it in the center strip, the one that is intact, the one that has not been cut, and then leave about 1/4 to 1/2 inch on the top and on the bottom so that we can fold up our pastry, but fill it up pretty well. We want that yummy, delicious filling inside this puff pastry. So go ahead and use half of your mixture. Now, once you've filled this first puff pastry, then you're going to repeat the same exact process with your second puff pastry. You just set this one aside and you bring over your other sheet of puff pastry and you repeat the same process that we did before. You will unfold and you will cut in strips as you did with the first sheet of puff pastry. You're just repeating the same process, cutting in strips, and then using the other half of that delicious filling for the second sheet. Now it's time to fold. So the first thing you want to do is you're going to fold up the bottom piece and a strip from either side. So this is the thick piece and those triangle segments. Then bring those up. And then you're just going to alternate. You're going to grab one strip from the right side, and then you're going to grab one strip from the left side. And this will just make a really pretty pattern on our Knish. So it's just basically repeating the same process over and over. One strip from the right, and then one strip from the left. And you're going to do this about halfway up. So keep going, one and one. When you've gone about halfway up, turn your Knish around, and then you're going to do the same thing from the other side. You're going to fold up and bring over those thick pieces, those triangles, and then you're going to continue your weaving process, and it just makes it easier to work when it's facing you. And so then start with your left, and this time you're coming towards you, and then your right, and you're just going to alternate the same way you were doing before. Left and right, left and right. And then at this point, you just tuck that little piece under, and I feel like I have enough pastry. I've covered most of my Knish, so I just cut off a little piece if I feel like I've already covered my potato. I do like that little vent on the end. It lets the steam escape, so I don't want to cover that. And then just tuck your puff pastry under, and then your first shortcut puff pastry potato Knish is ready, and it is time to move on to your second one. So now you guessed it, it's time to repeat the same process with our second log. The same thing, just fold up the thick piece and those two triangle pieces, and then start weaving. One piece from the right, one piece from the left. Right, left. Right, left. Right, left. And we've gone about halfway up, and we have about 4 or 5 pieces left on either side and those two triangles. So at that point is when you would turn it around and then begin your weaving from the other side. So fold up your thick piece and those thick triangles and bring them over, and that just helps support that yummy potato. And then continue your process of weaving. I have 5 on my right, so I'm going to start on my right, and then I'm going to go to my left and right and left, and then again right and left. And at this point I feel like I have enough, so I'll just tuck that little piece under, and I will remove the excess, and then just tuck that little piece of puff pastry under to finish off my log. And then that's it. My second log is ready, and I still have that little vent on either end, which is nice because it's a little peek hole. It just lets you see the delicious filling, and it gives everyone a clue as to what they will be eating. So now that both of my shortcut puff pastry potato Knishes have been assembled, just set them aside and then grab a baking sheet that you line with parchment paper, and then give it all a nice spray of nonstick cooking spray. Then grab your logs of shortcut puff pastry potato knish, and very carefully you are going to put them on this prepared sheet. I don't like to work directly on a sheet that's already been sprayed because it makes your puff pastry greasy and oily and it's just a mess. So I like to use a clean sheet, give it a nice spray, and then carefully transfer my logs onto this prepared sheet. Now grab your small bowl and an egg and a fork and your pastry brush, and you are to crack your egg into your bowl, and then you're just gonna beat that egg as we are going to use it to give our beautiful puff pastry an egg wash. I don't like to add water to this egg wash because I really feel that the puff pastry could really handle the egg without it being diluted. It gives it a nice color. So I just beat the egg and I don't add anything to it. And then I use my pastry brush and I give each of my shortcut puff pastry potato knishes a nice coating of egg wash. I want to make sure that I get every single piece of that puff pastry because it's really going to make a difference in the color. So just make sure to give it a really nice and thorough egg wash. Now, once both of your logs have been thoroughly coated in your egg wash, then it's time to place these beautiful potato knishes into the oven for baking. So very carefully grab your pan and place them into your hot oven, and then set a 30-minute timer so that your beautiful shortcut puff pastry potato knishes can bake. And then 30 minutes later, there they are. Look at how delicious they look. They're golden, and that beautiful egg wash makes them shiny, and they're flaky with that delicious puff pastry. They really, really are something special. The inside has that yummy potato with those golden onions and that touch of black pepper. It's really, really something special. Everyone is going to love this. So once you've pulled them out of the oven, it's time to remove them from your hot sheet and then very carefully just transfer them onto whatever serving platter you'd like to serve them on. I don't put them on a cooling rack because I really don't feel it's necessary. Plus, I really prefer to serve these nice and warm right when they come out of the oven. So I take them directly off of my baking sheet and I serve them onto a platter. Now tell me these don't look beautiful and impressive. They are a shortcut recipe, but when you serve them, they really, really look impressive. Nobody needs to know just how easy they are to make. They are really something and they make a statement. Not to mention, they're absolutely delicious. They are perfect for any night of the week. And of course, they are nice enough and they look fancy enough to be served for a special occasion and for guests. They are really an impressive side dish. So enough with the admiring of these beautiful shortcut puff pastry potato knishes. Now it's time for my favorite part. I want to taste them. I want to do it while they're still warm because they are so good. I want to take advantage of the fact that they're nice and warm straight out of the oven. So now I'm going to cut myself a slice. And this is what you would do to serve it to multiple people. Just cut them in slices and then serve everyone a piece. Wow, I can't wait to try this. Looks so good and it smells so good. Look at that delicious potato filling peeking out and those golden brown onions. Oh wow, so delicious. It's just such a pretty side dish and it is so, so tasty. It's simple, but the ingredients are absolutely delicious. All right, let's take a bite. I'm gonna go for the center so that I can get a nice amount of that delicious potato and onion filling and then that flaky puff pastry crust. I just wanna make sure to get the perfect bite. Look at how golden that looks. Look at that bottom, how beautifully golden it became in the oven. Delicious. All right, here we go. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. So tasty. It really tastes like you're eating a potato knish. So good. I cannot wait to have another bite. It is really, really delicious. You're gonna love it. There's just no words to describe it. It really feels like you're eating at a deli and having a delicious potato knish, but you really have not had to work so hard at it. It is really, really good. Look at how golden. Wow. That is so good. You are going to love this recipe. It is really, really delicious. The inside of this log is filled with that potato and onion filling. So, so good. Super impressive and super easy. So how amazing does this look? Those golden onions really, really give it an incredible flavor. And it really is very reminiscent of a potato knish. You can serve it with some mustard or deli mustard, and it's a perfect side for whatever you're serving. Trust me. No, better yet, don't trust me. You're gonna have to try to make this recipe yourself. And of course, if you've enjoyed today's recipe, don't forget to like, comment, and share. And most important of all, remember to subscribe to my channel and to touch that little notification bell so that you don't miss out on a single amazing and delicious recipe that I have planned for you. See you next time. Sally, that girl in the kitchen.